Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to Dismantling Injustice, the podcast of Brooklyn Community Bail Fund, where we work with partners to free people from incarceration, whether it's prison, jail, immigration detention, or surveillance. On this podcast, we offer analysis on issues affecting folks who encounter the criminal, legal, and immigration systems, and you can learn more about us at brooklynbailfund.org. I'm Carl Hamid Lipscomb, BCBF's Director of Advocacy and Policy, and I'm here with Saleh Israel, our Director of Special Initiatives and the producer and creator of this podcast. So today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Amaha Kassa, who is just a longtime movement leader who's worked across social movements, in the labor movement, the workers' rights movement, the economic justice movement broadly, and the immigrant rights movement, which is how I know Amaha. Amaha is the founder and director of African Communities Together. Before that, he worked out in the Bay Area, where he led East Bay Alliance for Sustainable Economy, a workers' rights nonprofit in Oakland. And today, Amaha, we thought it would be good for us to talk to Amaha because Amaha and African Communities Together leads a statewide campaign here in New York called Break the Shackles, of which Brooklyn Community Bail Fund is a co-anchor. And, we're going to talk about Break the Shackles today and talk about a piece of legislation that we have moving. And so welcome, Amaha.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thanks so much. Thanks. Thank you for joining us. I don't get to say this much to people, but you're one of the people that, I really look up to in our movement and look to in our movement because you just have such a strategic vision and strategic analysis on where we need to go and how we can get there. And that's something that I've just always appreciated about your leadership. And so ACTA and BCBF, as I mentioned, are co-anchoring the Break the Shackles campaign, which is currently moving the Stop Immigrant Bond Abuse Act in the New York State Legislature. And so, Amaha, I guess, why don't we start out? If you could tell us, what are the aims of the Break the Shackles campaign, and what would the Stop Immigrant Bond Abuse Act accomplish?
Thanks, Carl, and thanks to BCBF for co-leading this work. So, Break the Shackles is seeking to fight back against profiteering on detained immigrants. In the last couple of years, we've seen a really vibrant movement that have been challenging incarceration and detention for profit, including the movement to end cash bail, the fight against private prisons, the fight to get rid of privatized immigration detention facilities, and we think a really important but not yet kind of fully engaged part of the movement is fighting back against these companies, these immigration bond companies who are profiteering off of a lot of our detained immigrant brothers and sisters by offering people with really exorbitant immigration bonds, for-profit immigration bonds, and oftentimes mandating that in order to receive those bonds, they participate in electronic monitoring using electronic shackles. So that's the shackles and Break the Shackles. And in fact, they are actually paying these companies to service these electronic shackles. And so in a sense, people are being expected to pay for their own shackling. And we just think that that's a tremendous injustice and is a symptom of much deeper problems, obviously, in our immigration system, particularly for Black and brown immigrants. But is also, and those are really national fights, things that we really have to challenge, Congress and the Biden administration over. But we think that New York State can take important steps right here and now to fight back against these companies and to regulate these companies and to rein in these companies. And the first thing that New York can do is pass the Stop Immigrant Bond Abuse Act, or SIMBA as it's affectionately known, the Stop Immigration Bond Abuse Act. That is a bill which we've introduced in the New York State Legislature.
Thanks, Amaha. And can you walk us through, I know that ACT and BCBF have been working on this campaign for a while. Can you walk us through the history of the campaign itself? What was the genesis of this campaign? Was this based on something experienced by an ACT member, or
Exactly. We started to work on this issue because we're an organization for immigrants from Africa, African communities together. We have chapters here in New York. We have chapters in DC and Virginia, and we work with a network of leaders nationwide. And we do a lot of different things. We do some direct services, especially immigration legal services. We do leadership development and organizing within African immigrant communities. And we do campaigns. We run and participate in campaigns to address, structural and systemic issues affecting our communities. And the genesis of this campaign is, members of our community, African immigrants, mostly West African immigrants in our New York office, were coming to us recently released from immigration detention. Sometimes they spent 3 months, 6 months, 12 months or more in immigration detention. A lot of them they were in immigration detention only for immigration violations, nothing else, right? And a lot of them were exercising their legal right to seek asylum, and either they crossed the southern border or they flew into a plane at JFK and were put into detention by ICE. And when oftentimes the only choice, the only option they had of how to get out of immigration detention was to post a bond. Now, under the law, ICE is supposed to look at everybody's individual case. If they don't need to post a bond, they shouldn't be required to post a bond. But especially over the last few years, something like 96% of immigrants, at least in key jurisdictions, have been required to post a bond to get released. And the numbers for those bonds have kept going up and up and up. And so I know, I know that BCBF deals with that every day, as you all are helping provide people with, sort of nonprofit, non-exploitive ways to get out of immigration detention. But we see that on the other end with people coming to us from services. And we were seeing people come into our office wearing electronic monitors from companies like Libre by Nexus, which is the biggest for-profit immigration bond company in the country. And sometimes they were wearing on one ankle an electronic monitor from Libre, and on their other ankle, they were wearing a court-mandated monitor from that ICE required them to wear. So they were double shackled up. When we started to look at these contracts, when we started to understand that people were paying for their own shackles, when we would talk to people who were limited English-speaking West African immigrants and ask them, did anybody ever explain this contract to you or what you were signing up on, in your own language? And of course, the answer was no. And when we learned that because of the way that immigration bonds are different from criminal bonds, even if everybody shows up to every single one of these of their appointments, which is what the bonds are supposed to be requiring them to do, even if they win their case and are found to have asylum and be admitted to as a permanent resident of the United States, they will never get that money back. That goes straight into the pockets of the bond companies, and they never see a penny of that back. And we just thought this was a gross injustice, and we wanted to get rid of it. We introduced a bill in 2019, modeled on some federal legislation that hadn't gone anywhere, or some attempts by other states to rein in these companies. And, it was a pretty modest bill that would have just, sort of gotten rid of some of the worst abuses by these companies, including some of the worst abuses regarding shackling. But what happened was that other leaders who've been working in the anti-incarceration, anti-detention space, including the Brooklyn Community Bail Fund, approached us and said, you know what, we would love to partner with you on this. We'd love to support you. But actually, we think we can go much further. Instead of simply reining in some of these abuses of shackles, why don't we just say you can't require shackling as a condition of somebody's immigration bond? Let's go further. If we're going to do this, we're not abolishing entirely this industry, but at least we can make it so that they can't profiteer from shackling, and that they can't kind of operate in this sort of limbo where nobody is really regulating them, and where they just kind of seem to act like they're a law unto themselves, and even the standards that people have fought to impose on bail bond companies many times either they don't apply to them or they act like they don't apply to them. And so that's what SIMBA is doing. The Break the Shackles Coalition has several dozen groups ranging from immigrant rights groups like ACT to groups working on electronic surveillance, anti-shackling groups, anti-incarceration groups, groups serving particular communities that have been affected by immigration detention. And we're aiming to get this law passed.
Great. Yeah. As you're talking, everyone in the room with me, everyone's shaking their heads. And I've seen this every time you mention, the ACT member that had two different shackles on, different legs from different entities is just, I don't know why I'm surprised that, there's so many injustices in our immigration system around literally every corner. There's something going on that's nefarious. Exactly,
and it's one of those points where things become so cruel that they're almost absurd and humorous. It's just it's not humorous for the person experiencing it, but it's definitely ridiculous. And cruel.
And what's the current status of the bill? Has it been introduced this session?
Yes, we have an introduction. Well, actually, sorry, let me correct that. We are finalizing the bill text, and we expect introduction of an updated version of the bill. There was a carryover version of the previous bill that was kind of automatically introduced, but we're expecting an updated version of the bill to be introduced shortly. We're working with a couple of champions in the legislature, Assemblyman Harvey Epstein and State Senator Jamal Bailey, both of whom have been very active on kind of decarceration and criminal legal reform in the past. And it's going to get introduced. It's going to move through the insurance committee because bail bonds are considered, under the jurisdiction of insurance. And like I said, it's an interesting year. It's a tough year because of COVID and a lot of budget, chaos, and other issues and other scandals playing out in Albany. So it's going to be a challenging year for sure, but we're aiming to get it past this session.
That's great. That's phenomenal. And so, we don't have too much time left, but I know that, ACT really is one of the premier Black immigrant serving organizations in the country. There aren't many Black immigrant serving organizations in the U.S., and ACT is definitely, has its footprint in the Black immigrant movement. And so aside from Break the Shackles, what are some of ACT's other priorities? I know you all always have a ton of stuff going on.
Well, thanks, Carl, especially as someone who's worked and organized and been a leader in that space yourself. That means a lot. Yeah, we've got our hands full. I think we do, as I said, we do a mix of direct services, including community outreach. A lot of that is immigration legal. We're just trying to help our people get their status, become less vulnerable to deportation and detention. But the main thing we're doing is kind of organizing and developing leaders, grassroots leaders. Our members are, overwhelmingly, working class and low income African immigrants, hair braiders, taxi drivers, security guards, home health aides, in New York, and then also in DC and Virginia. And then we work with kind of a national network of leaders as well. We're doing campaigns at the city, state, and local levels, or city, state, and federal levels. Right now, besides Break the Shackles, the other legislation we're moving in New York State is to expand language access so that we can get French, Arabic, and in some parts of the state, even where we have significant refugee communities, even some African languages, like including Somali and Swahili, as languages of translation. At the federal level, we're very engaged with immigration policy, particularly those that kind of disproportionately affect our African immigrant community. So trying to undo a lot of damage that the Trump administration did over the last 4 years. We filed we're part of 4 different lawsuits against the administration, including things like around SARS, the diversity visa, and the African ban. But also trying to challenge the new administration to go beyond just sort of blaming Trump for what are really long-term structural and systematic inequalities, particularly as they affect Africans and other Black immigrants in our immigration system. And so, we've been working with other Black immigrant groups under the hashtag Biden also deports, BAD. You might have seen that one circulating around trying to stop some of the deportation flights. And we really want to keep pushing this administration, but also keep pushing our city, state, and local officials to really think about, what going beyond the rhetoric about what it means to be a sanctuary city or welcoming country, and to think about the way that we have racialized and weaponized the immigration system, particularly against Black immigrants, African immigrants.
Yeah. Well, Amaha, it's always a pleasure. I don't know how you do it. I'm on a lot of Zooms with you, and I remember when, before COVID, you'd be in Minnesota one week. The next 2 days later, you're on a conference call and you're in DC, and then you're back in New York. And you still somehow managed to replicate that via Zoom. And I don't know how, but, I know that it's for the greater liberation of our people. And so I just, I really appreciate your work. And thank you for joining us. For our listeners, you can learn more about ACT's work at Africans. That's African with an S at the end, africans.us. I love simple websites, so that's great. And you can also follow them on Twitter at AfricansUS. Thanks again for joining us, Amaha. And until next time, we're out.
Thanks so much for having me, and look forward to continuing our work together.
Likewise.